Welcome back, and Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Parsha Tetzaveh, the Parsha, and you shall command, follows the portion of asking people for donations, because once all the donations for the building of a temple were gathered, what was next was the instructions for building that temple. So now Moses is told, you should command the people of Israel and bring the craftsmen and the workers and get them all together and start building. And this week's portion is all about the construction of the tabernacle and also the induction ceremonies that will happen once the temple is completed. And you'll see, if you read along, especially in today's portion that we read, of the third of the portion that we read, it was about the blood ritual where blood is dipped and put on the ears and the earlobes and toes and so on, and the clothing. That really was sort of Moses' way of creating a ceremonial feel about the dedication of the temple. And to begin, of course, we are still very much in lockdown. It's not clear exactly when we will get a chance to go to our own Mishkan, our own tabernacle, our own sanctuary. When will we have a rededication of public life? When will we be able to, in fact, gather? Masks may still be mandatory even after vaccination. It may actually be harder for you to wear a mask once you've been vaccinated, because remember, you've taken care of yourself. But the reason you might wear a mask is to take care of others who have not been vaccinated. Now, when self-interest is at heart, where you could get sick, you might wear a mask. People have trouble even then wearing masks. Imagine if you have no fear. I'm vaccinated. I can't get sick. And if I do, it will be just a cold. You want me to wear a mask for the one person on the bus who may? I don't care. So it's going to be harder for people now to be empathetic, especially because now you'll see the shift will be something very, very strange. What will happen is people who are vaccinated no longer want to wear masks, and they'll say that those who are not vaccinated, A, are unlikely to catch it, or B, it's their own problem for not getting vaccinated. That's the way human nature is. They forget their need once we are no longer all in this together. So this phase between unvaccinated and fully vaccinated will start to bring out the worst in people. And hopefully we can remind people that if you need to wear a mask, it's for other people. And let's see how many people withstand the test of compassion and empathy once they no longer need a mask. That's going to be interesting to see, guaranteed. The other thing that we really have to consider is the fact, first of all, consider the fact that I'm not a scientist or a doctor, and I'm not giving you medical advice. And actually, as a matter of fact, I saw this incredible quote that I have to share with you on Twitter. And it goes like this: with all the folks on Twitter who are apparently doctors specializing in infectious disease, that also happen to be economists and also happen to be lawyers who are experts in charters of rights and freedom, I'm surprised that there are any problems in Canada whatsoever. Yep, it's really too bad. There are a lot of experts in a lot of fields that you would never guess. They have so many disciplines, and they're all on Twitter. But thank God, Baruch Hashem, Canada is full of experts. But I'm not one of those experts. I'm not a Twitter expert. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a Charter of Freedoms expert. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a rabbi. And let me tell you, as a rabbi, what I worry about is that it will be kids that are unvaccinated, and the variant will make it possible for kids to get sick. And we, adults who will be vaccinated, will make our kids sick. You hear me? That's what I worry about. I worry that this is changing. And I worry that once we're vaccinated, we'll care less. Get vaccinated as soon as you can, but care more, not less. Now let's talk about what happens in the portion, and then we'll go on to the fact that today is Shushan Purim. It's the day after Purim, and it is a day in which Purim would have been celebrated in the city of Shushan. Why? Because Shushan was a walled city, and walled cities celebrate the next day, not the day of Purim. Like Jerusalem, technically today would be their Purim. And there's lots of conversation about how you celebrate Purim on a Shabbat, and the fact is it's all pushed off and it happens Sunday. And of course, I don't want to get into the mayhem that's causing with gatherings and super spreader events, but that's what's going on. So here we are on Shushan Purim, the Purim that would have been celebrated in the walled city of Shushan or any other walled city around the world. But our Purim happened on Friday, Thursday night with Megillah reading, Friday morning Megillah reading, the gifting of Mishloach Manot, of food and charity and so on, and dressing up. Obviously, this year was deeply, deeply curtailed. So Parshat Tetzaveh, the commandments to build the temple don't seem to have a lot to do with Purim until you get to an odd bit of text in which Moses is starting to lay out details of sacrifice. And one of the things that Moses seems to repeat over and over and over in his instructions to Aaron, how should you process the carcass of animals that you kill? Now, I'm sorry if it's a little bit banal to talk about this, but it keeps repeating it, and it was part of their sacred ritual was animal sacrifice. One of the things you have to do, and I won't get gory on you, but one of the things you must do whenever you process a sacrificed animal is you must remove the layer of fat and sinew and the silver muscle that covers the inside, that covers the vital organs. You have to remove it. You're not allowed to eat it. It has to be burnt. And you always wonder to yourself, why? What do they care? What difference does it make whether you eat the fat here or you eat the liver there or you eat the kidneys? Who cares? People sacrifice animals. Let them have it. Moses actually goes into details where sometimes you have to braise it, sometimes you have to boil it, sometimes you have to put bread with it, sometimes you have to put oil. A lot of details. But the question of why do you have to remove these fats? What did the fats ever do? What, is fat such a problem? No. Nicht gefährlich. In moderation. The reason you have to remove the fat is because the act of sacrificing is about revealing oneself. It's about bringing an offering to the temple for a purpose. You're either bringing it as shlamim, as a whole offering, which means you're dedicating the entire animal to the priests or to the temple, but it's as a sign of peace or wholeness. It's typically brought on a holiday. Olah is something in which the entire animal is completely burnt. It's the first time we really come across the word Holocaust is not in reference to the Shoah. It's actually the idea that the entire animal is consumed, which is why it was applied to the Shoah, because it was a complete consumption of humanity. And the Jews suffered Jews of Europe certainly suffered a Holocaust. But Holocaust itself means Kalil Taktir, which means you should burn the entirety of the animal, which is found in the opening of the book of Leviticus when it describes the Olah, means it's entirely incinerated. That's a very powerful offering of some sort. There's some reason why you take an animal and literally waste it. There's some kind of deep pathology. Then there's the Chatat. The Chatat is a hybrid. It's a sin offering in which you have to come to the temple and you have to lay your hands on the animal in front of the priest. And the priest begins with a ritual that says, "Why are you here?" And you say, "I'm here to confess a sin." What sin are you confessing? And you have to hold on to the animal and say, "This is my sin. This is what I've done." The animal is in lieu of my punishment. I'm punishing myself by giving away an animal. That is where the origin of semicha comes from. When a rabbi is ordained, it's because someone would have laid hands on them as a sign of ordination, sort of like a father or child, a parent blessing a child. You put your hands on so that you can put the energy into them. So this smicha, this laying on of hands, really originates with atonement sacrifice, which means you are coming to the temple after much thought and cost and energy to bring your animal from home to confess, to acknowledge, to open up the inside vital organs of your body. You are expressing what is inside publicly. You're uncovering, you're making visible the invisible. You're removing the fat from your heart so that what's inside can be seen. That which we keep to ourselves has to be revealed. And that is why Parshat Tetzaveh, in which it talks about the revelation of the vital internal organs, is really a perfect connection to Purim. Because Purim is a time when you probably know that we wear masks. We wear masks, we dress up, sort of like the carnival, and it sort of resembles, people say, the Halloween idea. Whatever the case is, it's all about hiding your identity or creating an identity for yourself that is not you without a mask. And why do we do that? We do that because Purim was a story of hidden identities. It's a story of people who were not known and became known. And that works for Mordecai, who was known as Mordecai the Jew, but it wasn't known that he was related to Esther, who became the queen, who was unknown that she was Yehudi, she was a Yahud, a Jew. It was unknown. And Haman was not known as an anti-Jew or an anti-Semite, as it's called, but he became publicly such, but he did it through back channels, which we'll talk about. And then, of course, there was the hidden story of what went into the king's diary, which he forgot, which he remembered, that Mordecai had saved his life. And all these things were hidden, but subsequently revealed. And there was the gallows that Haman had built for Mordecai that was hidden. And then there's the hiddenness of power and the hiddenness of culpability. And then there's the hiddenness of Vashti. It starts with a party that's going to last for many, many days, a huge party. And Vashti is demanded to come to the king's palace. The queen is demanded that she has to appear, whatever that appearance was supposed to be. There's lots of conversation about whether she was supposed to dance or entertain or just simply appear. In the end, she refuses to appear at the party. So the first hiddenness in the Megillah is Vashti. I am not appearing. I am remaining invisible. What is the king's response? The king's response is to turn to Memucan, his favorite advisor, and Memucan comes up with a really great response to the king. Your Majesty, Vashti didn't just commit a sin against you in not coming to the party and remaining hidden, remaining invisible. What she did was she actually proved to women that they have power. And if women come to believe that they have power, you know what that says to all the men in your kingdom? The king was powerless, the queen was powerful, and now women in their homes are going to abuse their husbands. They're going to start telling them, you're not more powerful than I am. Look, the queen was powerful, I'm powerful. And Memucan says, Your Majesty, that would be a true disaster if women had power. So the first hiddenness of the story is the hiddenness of Vashti, and then the king has to act. He removes Vashti as queen, whatever remove means, whether kills her, removes her, tosses her out, sends her into the wild, who knows? Who knows what happened in those days, 2,500 years ago. So that hiddenness of Vashti causes this incredible challenge. And it's misogynistic at its entire essence, which is why the antidote has to be Esther. But let me share with you something about women and powerlessness and empowering, and it happens in modern day China. And listen to this incredible little news item. In China, a man whose last name was Cheng and a woman whose last name was Wang got divorced. True story. And normally it's about splitting assets, and they have their divorce rules and regulations like every country does. But the Beijing divorce court, in this case, orders a man to compensate his wife for housework that she did during their marriage. And she will receive 50,000 yuan, which is $7,700 approximately, US dollars, for 5 years of unpaid labor, which is not a lot because a housekeeper costs that much for 1 year. But symbolically, the courts recognized that a woman's labor at home was disproportionate to that of the man, significantly disproportionate, and they ordered him to pay for housework. And now you see what's going to happen, because the moment that happens, China is a large country, And even though the court said that housework is normally not included in property, but it's an intangible property value, and they ordered payment, and their internal, China has a web platform called Weibo, and more than 570 million people viewed the story about this woman getting compensated for housework. That's 570 million people now know that the rules have changed. Do you think that could have a seismic impact in China? Of course it can. Do you think the idea that women are now empowered to say that my labor at home is not free? Absolutely going to make a difference. Will men do more housework? Probably not. Will they have to compensate women more? Probably yes. But think about how Achashverosh and his team of advisors knew that if 570 million people found out that he had let Vashti off the hook and she was powerful, they too would want to be powerful. And that's why he quashed Vashti's rebellion. That is the opening of the visibility and invisibility story of the Mask of Purim. And now let's talk about another hidden gem in the Megillah, and I say gem facetiously, and that is Haman. You know, it's easy to read the story of Haman as a frothing, rabid anti-Semite who, whenever he saw a Jew, would spit at them, but that's not the case. If you read it carefully, you realize that Haman was very, very, very careful to be an excellent racist, a racist who didn't publicly declare himself, but rather privately do the work. Yes, he was very, very upset when Mordecai would not bow to him. But then again, Mordecai was exercising his freedom. And Haman recognized that the freedom that Mordecai wanted is a public freedom. He wants to be free in public. So Haman hurts him privately, invisibly, as opposed to visibly. He doesn't say to Mordecai, Mordecai, you dirty Jew, why are you not bowing down to me? He doesn't say that. He doesn't hit Mordecai. He doesn't have a fight with him. He doesn't take out an ad in a newspaper. He goes to the king and he says to him quietly, hey, Achashverosh, listen, see this big suitcase of gelt I got here? We'll get to that in a minute. There's a people, Yeshno Am Echad, there's a people amongst all of your people that are different, and they follow their own rules, and the laws of the kingdom don't really matter to them. And they represent the potential fifth column. You know, they could come back and hurt you. And why would you allow a people, like as a group, to foment this kind of power and authority beyond your power and authority? And Achashverosh says, there is? Really? Okay. What do you want to do about it? Look, Your Majesty, here's this $10,000 kikar of silver. There's like a lot of money here. I'm giving you the money as a gift, just to say thank you for taking my call and understanding how important this is to you and your people. What I'd like your ring so I can write letters, and I'd like your postal service to work on my behalf to send out letters to eradicate these people. They're a threat. They're a clear present danger. He doesn't ever say who this is. He doesn't tell them. He doesn't tell the king. He talks about the abstract worry of the invisible people who could come and hurt the visible king. And the king acquiesces. We don't know the real story. Was Achashverosh stupid? Was he drunk? Was he disinterested? Was he part of it? Who knows? But the story that's being told, and by the way, I'm not going to argue with you that this story actually happened. I don't want to get into that conversation. There are many historians who feel it's entirely an allegory written for the Jews of the exile to bring them together as a community. Regardless, if you believe it's a true story, it's a true story. If you don't, it's still a powerful story, and that's why we talk about it. So Haman never uses the terminology. He doesn't ever say who they are. He just says what they are. And of course, the letters go out, and the letters now say, we're going to gather and kill the Jews, because now he's identifying who it is. And of course, as the Megillah reminds us, a letter that is written with the stamp and signature of the king can never be retracted. You can write an equal opposite decree, but once it goes out, it's sacred. You can never retract what the king has put out. His authority is perfect, and his behavior is perfect, never to be challenged. If you want to change something, you have to write another letter, which they do later on. They say, Jews of the world, on such and such a day, your enemies have been given permission to kill you. Rise up and fight back. That's the opposite, but they couldn't rescind the order. So they don't rescind the order. Now here, in a modern-day Haman story, I want to contextualize it for you in something incredibly modern that happened this week. This is the Haman story encapsulated. There's a guy in Massachusetts, and his name is Bob Hoey. What does Bob Hoey do? Bob Hoey sits on a school district board, and when he's talking about the formation of their board, he says, well, we had a board, and we had this person, and we had this person, and we lost the kike. We lost the kike. I mean, he says, the Jewish guy. He says, I hate to say it, but that's what people used to say behind his back. It took a few days till he realized actually how horrible what he had said is. And there were many things he said. He said many things about other people, about Indian Americans, about diversity. Like a lot. This man was clearly on the side of white supremacy. There's no question about that. And he referred to himself as Archie Bunker, which should explain most of what went on there. The mayor calls it offensive and repulsive, and they ask for his resignation, and eventually he resigns. So what does he do? He uses the word for the Jew that they use behind the scenes. In other words, behind the scenes, that's what they always called the guy. They always called this guy Gary Frisch, the kike. And it's almost like he didn't realize that that's so terrible, or he knew it was terrible, and he used it anyhow. But then on public TV, he says, that's what we called him. I don't know, behind his back, we called him the kike. And this reminds me of the Haman story. Behind his back, he called him whatever name he wanted. But when it got public is when we found out who he really was against. Well, I don't need to go into the origin or the etymology of kike and where it comes from. Some say it comes from, when you didn't know how to sign your name, you were told to mark an X, and the Jewish people who came across in Ellis Island or immigration wouldn't mark an X because an X is similar to a cross, so they'd do a circle, and they were known as keikel, circle. I don't know. Some people will say yes, some people will say no. Whatever the case is, a kike is a slur. And it's clear that Mr. Hoey used that word all the time. And finally it came out. So when the invisible became visible, he resigned. But you have to wonder how much of this really goes on. How much of this goes on about all kinds of things. I know I was raised in a community in which people who were black were called by their Yiddish term Schwarze. Now, you can argue Schwarze just means black. But I would argue, and as I did even as a young child, it really, really grated on me that people would have to be referenced by their color. I never understood that because I hated being referenced by my weight, the fat one. So why would I want to be referenced by my color? Why would we want to do that? Would we want to reference the rich one, the smelly one? Why would we want to do that? I never understood it. And I cringe to this day when I hear in some of my former communities the term Schwarze used so loosely as though it is a proper description for an individual. It's what we say behind the scenes, the invisible, that becomes visible. And that is why the story of Purim is all about masks and hiding. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. It is the heart that we need to see because the essential is not visible to the eye. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry And friends, if COVID has taught us anything, it is that we need to start looking for the invisible with the heart, because the eye can no longer see that which is invisible. And the eye can no longer see that which is essential, because we are not connected anymore this way. No matter what you think of Zoom or TV, it is not a connection. It's an observation. It's an awareness, but it's not a connection, because there is no energy being passed back and forth. You cannot see the crinkle at the corner of my eye as I struggle for a year to talk to you through the camera. You cannot see it. The camera doesn't show it. But if you were here, you would see it. But you can feel it. You must know that it's there. You can't imagine this is fun. And if you do, you have to tweak your heart so you understand more about what is essential. Nobody is having a good time anymore. Nobody. And the cracks are showing everywhere. And the story of Purim couldn't be more relevant, because we are all about to unmask. Or some of us have already. And some of us have shown us who they really are behind the mask they wore all the time. Now the masks are entirely off. You know, when they talk about disabilities or equity groups that need special support, when they talk about disabilities, they talk about visible disabilities and invisible disabilities. And a visible disability would be obviously someone who has a mobility issue, someone who has a visible injury. When they go to write and you notice they're missing their fingers, that's a visible, and everybody understands that. But it's harder when you start dealing with invisible disabilities like mental illness, or someone with a heart condition, or stress, or anxiety. How do you quantify it? Well, if we use just our eyes to see people, well, we can see their visible disabilities. But if we use our heart to see people, we can probably start detecting the essential disability and listening to people and hearing them and hearing their labored breathing or their psychic damage or their emotional torture. We can start to feel heart to heart. And the story of Purim is not only about others being unmasked or others unmasking themselves, it's about us unmasking so that others can see us. And I, as a rabbi and a leader, I'm not afraid to be public. I'm not afraid to speak my heart to anybody. It's uncomfortable. It is not easy to do. It is not easy to tell what is in your heart to people who look at you and say, "Oh, I never quite thought that rabbis were vulnerable that way. I never quite thought that a rabbi, I kind of just never thought the rabbi's supposed to be there for us. Or, yes, Rabbi, I care for you, but I just didn't realize, I thought that you'd be there for me. But Rabbi, no, and I'm not saying I need you there for me, but I need to tell you that there comes a time when we need to unmask if we want to be loved and cared for. If you are unprepared to be vulnerable to anybody, you will never be loved or feel the love you need. And when I, as you do as well, have trouble sleeping at night, everybody I talk to has trouble sleeping at night. Everybody is worried. When you're having trouble sleeping at night, you're not alone. Because we are more vulnerable, and we do have more stress. And I, like you, am realizing that this is a changed landscape. We are like sitting in a cave, watching the ice age move in front of us. It is carving up the land that we used to know. Land that used to be flat is now gouged with valleys. Boulders that we thought were immovable have been gobbled up in the ice and have moved miles downstream. Rivers have changed their courses. Hilltops are flattened, trees are gone, prairies have grown up. Everything that we knew has changed, and the Ice Age will be gone, and it will melt, and it will leave behind a changed landscape perpetually. And it may be beautiful, but it's entirely different. Friends, it is time for us to start unmasking. And I don't mean taking off your mask. I mean following the story of Purim. Who unmasks themselves? Mordecai unmasks himself to the king. Mordecai unmasks himself to Esther. Esther unmasks herself to King Ahasuerus. At the risk of her life, she says, I need to talk to you, even though you haven't called me for 30 days and you could kill me right now. And then at the party that she invited the king and Haman to, she unmasks herself and says, Ahasuerus, you've given him permission to kill those people. I am those people. And that could have gone entirely wrong. He could have said, you are? Well, I'll get a new queen. He already deposed the queen. Why should this be any different? She unmasks herself, and she saves her people. And to all of you out there who are vulnerable, who are anxious, who are stressed, just like I am, who are having trouble sleeping, who are worried, who wonder what the landscape will look like, you need to know that if we care about what is essential in each other, we will always be able to see each other. But if all we do is look, we'll never find. I want to close with a final quote from a German artist. I think you should look him up, see his work, especially the incredible work on Birkenau, the controversial work he did. Gerhard Richter. And he says, it makes no sense to expect or claim to make the invisible visible, or the unknown known, or the unthinkable thinkable. We can draw conclusions about the invisible. We can postulate its existence with relative certainty. But all we can represent is an analogy which stands for the invisible but is not it. The way I love you and the way you love me is an analogy for what we believe is true, but it's not it. It involves unmasking your feelings, your heart, your vulnerability, looking for love, finding the people around you, because I'm telling you, at the end of the day, with the changed landscape we have, that is what is going to help us rebuild. We will not go back to normal. We will not. Normal is an analogy. The reality is what is yet to come, and it is unknown. But here's the lesson of Purim that we learned. The Jewish people in unknown will still do what is known to us. We will fight. We will take risks. We will unmask ourselves, even if it means risking everything. We will be vulnerable. We will share our hurt. We will hope. We will pray. We will care. We will love, even if that's the last thing we do. Friends, I urge you, get yourselves ready. Look for the people and things in your life that really matter, because that is what's going to sustain us in the long and challenging days ahead, the empathy-empty days. Shabbat Shalom.